About 2 million men and women in England and Wales suffer some form of abuse at the hands of their partners every year, but domestic abuse isn't yet a specific crime and conviction rates are low.
New draft legislation due to be published in the coming weeks could change that. It would mean that for the first time, controlling or coercive behaviour will be a criminal offence as well as physical violence. Breakfast Graham Satchell has been to see what difference it could make.
Who's going to be there?
It affects millions of women, men and children every day.
I'm hitting it, am I? You think I don't know what you're up to?
It is physical, emotional, financial, and it could be happening behind any front door.
Now tell me, or you know what's coming next.
Yeah, I thought it was my failings because...
Eve Thomas describes herself as a survivor of 20 years of domestic abuse. She's now campaigning to improve the lives of people trapped in abusive relationships.
I've been set on fire, I've had broken bones, cuts and bruises. The physical violence hurts, it's scary, it's petrifying, but the psychological, it leaves very, very deep scars. It's very hard it takes a lot of work, an awful lot of work to overcome that.
Eve's partner was eventually convicted of battery. It was a charge that, for her, didn't tell the whole story.
It doesn't say that he, caused all this psychological terror to not only myself but my children as well, and to other people. It doesn't mention that. All it says is battery.
He was guilty of more.
He was guilty of a lot more, yeah.
This is a public information film. Domestic violence is an underreported crime, and only 6.5% of incidents that are reported to the police lead to a successful conviction.
Experts say the reason conviction rates are so low is because currently there's no specific offence of domestic abuse in law. When people are prosecuted, both men and women, they're charged with other offences: assault, rape, murder.
Now a group of MPs is introducing a new bill which would make domestic abuse a specific crime in England, Wales and Northern Ireland for the first time.
Currently, the prosecutors, police, courts look at one incident in isolation. Very often, domestic abusers, it's coercive behaviour. It's over a period of time. It's not a one-off incident by and large. And so this bill seeks to deal with that kind of ongoing pattern of behaviour.
In America, where specific domestic abuse legislation was introduced 20 years ago, the results have been dramatic. Rates of domestic violence have fallen 67%, and domestic violence leading to murder is down 35%. Campaigners say changing the law here would be a start, but it's not enough.
Any amount of legislative change, if it isn't backed up with cultural change and the way in which the police in particular respond to incidents of domestic violence, we won't see that benefit for victims.
Won't make any difference.
The law on its own is not a panacea. It's important, there are gaps, we need to fill them, but it isn't a panacea.
The government is currently reviewing the way police handle domestic violence cases and says it will look at the proposed new legislation. Campaigners say more needs to be done. Still, 2 women a week are killed by their partners. Graham Satchell, BBC News.
With us now is Rachel Horman, who's a solicitor specialising in the field of domestic violence. Good morning, Rachel.
Good morning.
Well, the new legislation, when it comes to it, will outlaw controlling or coercive behaviour.
Yeah.
That's a difficult one to prove, though, isn't it?
Well, people have said that about domestic violence for the last 30 years, that it's one person's word against the other. And unfortunately, you do still hear people say that. So I don't think the proof is something that we need to worry about. And that on lots of occasions, there are easy methods to prove it, particularly with the technology that we have now, cyber stalking and that kind of thing. The evidence is there for all to see.
OK, so for somebody, and it can be men or women who are in this sort of position where something is going on that they're uncomfortable with, what's your advice? I mean, do you go straight to the police or do you have to start taking notes? How would it work?
Well, my advice is to go straight to the police.
At what point, when do you realise that that's what you need to do?
As soon as you're thinking that this behaviour makes you feel uncomfortable, then I would say that obviously it's unacceptable and you should seek advice at that stage. What we don't want to do is wait until the behaviour becomes very physical. And the case yesterday in the news with Lindsay Ashton, the dreadful murder, we don't want cases to wait until that stage, which is why the new legislation will hopefully be able to nip that behaviour in the bud before it becomes very abusive physically.
Yeah. Disagreements, rows, all part of married life or life between partners. There's feeling unhappy in a relationship, there's feeling uncomfortable in a relationship, and there's feeling fearful in a relationship. And it's, I suppose, would be difficult perhaps for people to decide at what point they do feel they need to take action.
Well, if you feel scared of your partner, then that, in my view, is unacceptable. And you should go and get some help and advice about that.
Where would they get that help or advice?
From the police, from Women's Aid and different charities that deal with domestic abuse. They're all there to help people in that circumstance.
And lots of people talking about, you know, feeling the difficulty of speaking out and there being a need for a cultural change. Is that something that you would echo?
Yes, definitely. I still think that there is acceptance of domestic abuse. I mean, if we look at the Nigella case recently that was in the newspapers, there were lots of people trying to justify that type of behaviour and why that may or may not have been acceptable. And I still feel that we get a lot of victim blaming in domestic abuse that you don't get with any other crime. It's always, well, why does she stay? What has she done to deserve that abuse? And also we need to see attitudes change within the criminal justice system, within the police. So when the new legislation does come through, part of that is that the police and the CPS do need to have training about how to use it.
Okay.
Up
Rachel,
those
thanks.
points, we can talk now to Rachel, who specialises in the field of domestic violence. Very good morning to you. Good morning. I'm just curious about so many things. They were talking here about coercive and controlling behaviour. What about getting evidence for that? Is it difficult for people to do so and kind of prove that that is going on?
Not necessarily. I don't think it's any more difficult than a lot of physical injuries, because the woman might not report that straight away. So the bruising or marks may have gone by the time that she does.
So at what point does someone, and it can be men or women, at what point should they sort of raise alarm bells, go to police?
I think if you feel intimidated or scared by your partner, then that's the time really that you should be going to the police to speak to them about it.
Yeah, where would the burden of proof be for this? So, for instance, because somebody could go to the police and say, I am feeling intimidated or scared by my partner or my spouse.
Yeah.
And they could say, well, that's just the way they are psychologically, they're a nervous character, etc. It'd be one person's argument against another without any physical evidence.
Again, that argument has been used for domestic violence for the last 30 or 40 years. The police would always say, we can't intervene because it's your word against somebody else's. And that's just not good enough now, and the police are trained not to do that anymore, and it would be exactly the same.
But, yeah, but there has to be, if it goes to court, there has to be a burden of
Absolutely.
proof. So what I'm asking is, where is that bar? How do you establish who's right and who's wrong?
You would still have to prove beyond reasonable doubt who was at fault in that situation, that the perpetrator had caused that fear.
Which is a grey area then, isn't it? So I'm just wondering how effective this new legislation might be in the end if it's difficult to prove.
I think it'll be very effective, and lots of behaviours now can be caught with the technology that we have, things like social media. If somebody hacks into your Facebook account, for example, then that can be proved. If somebody fits a tracking device onto your mobile phone and is tracking where you're going on a daily basis, then that can be proved. And I think most people would accept that that is unacceptable.
It's interesting looking at the figures, because they have a sort of law like this in America, don't they? And it's interesting looking at those figures, at how much things seem to have changed since it became law that domestic violence was a criminal offence. Yeah,
the domestic violence has reduced by about nearly 70%, which is an unbelievable figure. And when we think that domestic abuse costs this country £20 billion every year, then there will be a huge saving, not only in money, but of lives as well. Very interesting talking to you this morning. Thanks very much for your time. Thank you.
It's 30 minutes to 9.